Hi, welcome back to Super Sons. Today we're joined by one of the biggest names in comics today. You may know him from his runs on Midnighter, Justice League of America, Martian Manhunter, and so much more. Comics' favorite thirst trap, Steve Orlando. How the hell are you?
I'm great. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on.
Very excited to have you. We have the Steve Orlando with us today. So, Steve, if you haven't figured out yet, we are real journalists. We're hard-hitting, and we ask the questions that nobody else has the chutzpah to ask.
It's what I appreciate. I'm ready to answer them.
What's your favorite sandwich?
Probably the hardest question that you guys sent me beforehand. But you know what? It's actually like, I do have to say it's toss-up, so I apologize. There are two potential contenders, and the question is, am I drunk or not? If I am not, it's a Cuban sandwich.
Okay.
If I am, it is a 1 a.m., because I live in Boston, it is a 1 a.m. fried haddock sandwich with cheese, tomatoes, and lettuce on it.
A what sandwich? Can you explain that sandwich to me?
Well, it's a normal fried haddock sandwich, but I'm eating it at 1 a.m.
Got it. Well, I think the timing really and the intoxication does change your enjoyment of a sandwich.
Oh, I ate all 4 flavors of Lay's Flavor Icons potato chips in one sitting this weekend for my birthday. Yeah.
I was literally looking for those yesterday. What was your favorite?
Okay, well, 2 are actually surprisingly good. One is kind of like questionable, and one is abysmal. Sadly, for the Jersey folks here, the Philly cheesesteak one, despite claiming it was flavored by, I believe, Geno's Steaks, is kind of a joke. The Nashville hot chicken one is pretty good, but as my friend said when I was catching up with him over the weekend, not as good as actual Nashville hot chicken. So why would you not just eat the chicken? But then the Carnitas Street Tacos ones were actually quite good, as was the quote unquote New York style pizza one. So both of which I found very enjoyable. And on my next trip through a bottle of wine on my birthday, I'll probably be eating both of those again. Probably before, because 7-Eleven is the only thing open past midnight in Boston.
All of that is going on his little Excel sheet of sandwich orders.
Yeah, tomorrow is my birthday, so I may have to try that out. I don't know if I can eat 4. I probably could. So let's move into some comics craft.
All right. So a lot of your hero stories so far in your career sort of re-examine what a typical Cape story can be. Is there anything you like to examine in your stories that you don't often see explored?
I mean, it's not that there's a specific thing, other than I think that our obligation to readers and you folks is to give you something thought-provoking and different. So there's never a specific thing. We kind of don't know until we're sitting down with the characters. But, I think we have to aim higher. I came up reading comics from a pretty experimental time, the late 80s, early 90s. I always think about the book Enigma, which if you folks haven't read, Peter Milligan and Duncan Fegredo, great book. But in it, like, the hero eventually beats the villain by just repeatedly asking him, and then what? And by doing so shows him that his whole life is essentially meaningless. And so I've always liked when there are sort of more thought-provoking solutions than a punch to the face. And of course, if you've read my work, I like a punch in the face as well, a lot, maybe more than other people. But it's not the only solution. I think you gotta burn that match when it best suits you. So yeah, there's not one specific thing, but it's just like there are other ways to solve problems. And I especially started that when I started working on Wonder Woman, because it was like, for her, violence is the last resort. So by definition, if that's part of her character, then you got to come up with a lot of other resorts before then. So yeah, there's no one thing. I just think that you folks deserve things that are not always sort of simple, clean, easy solutions. We're here to think about things and be entertained, of course. But I'm even more entertained when I realize something new, or when something new is shown to me, in addition to like things blowing up and, of course, the aforementioned punches in the face. So to me, that's just part of the job. we can't rest on our laurels. And you know, if folks are showing up for us every week, we got to give the best, most provocative work we can.
So you actually jumped ahead for my questions. I've been trying to organize these a little better, but I did write about this later for the interview. In JLA, there is a quote unquote fight between Ray and Dreamslayer. And that battle really isn't fought with fists or anything like that. It happens through a conversation. And what do you find important about that? The lack of violence in a confrontation. What do you find interesting in that that theme?
Well, again, it's, you know, like, it's about if it fits the characters, first of all. You know, with Ray and Dreamslayer, they're both people with what are in many ways almost godlike abilities, quite literally godlike abilities of Dreamslayer. And the Ray is also incredibly powerful when you actually think about his power set. And that's to say, like, that's not to say there wasn't like hardcore, gory punch ups in that very issue, for example. When you have Tracer and Lobo fighting in that issue, that's going to be some like gory, like Takashi Miike violence, because look at those two characters. But then when you look at the Ray and Dreamslayer, you have two people that have been through a lot of trauma, that have like done a lot of self-realization. And so it didn't seem to me like it would be the first resort for someone like the Ray, who has had his own sort of internal struggle with power and personal restraints, personal prisons that he's had to escape, to just go in, you know, guns blazing with Dreamslayer. And yeah, Ray was a victim of his parents' lies that they used to cage him and keep him under control. Dreamslayer was a victim of severe psychological abuse on the part of Lord Haddock. So it just didn't. It fit the moment for me, and I like tension that isn't always resolved with a punch in the mouth. I know, again, it'll always sound ridiculous coming from me, because I'm the guy that had Midnighter punch his boyfriend's father's head off. He was a homunculus at the time, but it's just the way, you know, it's true to me. Like I love The Seventh Seal. To me, that's just as riveting as a movie like Creed in totally different ways. So it's all about how you build the stakes. I mean, I've sort of like teed off that my version of Doomsday Clock would have basically just been Superman and Dr. Manhattan playing Chutes and Ladders or something, but all of reality would have been on the line for like 12 issues. So maybe it's good I didn't write that book. But
I would have read that. That would have been very... That's the pulse-pounding stakes that I want.
Well, Superman isn't really a Chutes and Ladders guy. That's just the first board game I pulled out of my ass. Like, if he really wanted to torture Dr. Manhattan, it would probably be Settlers of Catan.
Yeah, okay. Those two playing Scrabble, like at the farm, just hanging out.
Scrabble with Dr. Manhattan would be so insufferable. He'd be telling you it wasn't a word before you were already putting it down.
I mean, he's insufferable just in general, so... Having a board game night with Dr. Manhattan or anyone from the Watchmen crew does not sound like a good night.
Well, I mean, hanging out with the naked blue man would be very, you know, it's going to catch you off guard. You're not going to be able to concentrate on Scrabble.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I would not be thinking about 7-letter words. I'd be thinking about 4-letter words in that scenario.
Just dong.
Yeah. I don't want to get off on a tangent about how if you put Dr. Manhattan in any property, he has to hang full dong. So, Jake.
All right. So,
it's true. It's why they canceled Watchmen Kids. Like, they were just like...
It'll happen eventually.
Alan Moore is going to come.
Hopefully not.
Watchmen babies. Oh. All right. Centering.
All right. So while I was thinking up some questions, I hit a wall creatively. So I thought it would be interesting to ask, what was your way of dealing with writer's block?
Well, okay, so I saw this question, and part of me was like you guys are going to think, all of you are going to think that I'm a huge asshole, because so cards on the table. I was mentored in comics for 20 years by Stephen T. Siegel, who was a comic writer with Joe Kelly in the 90s, 2000s, but then went on to create Ben 10 and Generator Rex and a bunch of stuff for Cartoon Network. This is all to say that he is one of the most compassionate people I know, but also one of the most utilitarian and no bullshit people I know. which comes around to my answer to this, is that I sort of think that writer's block is a luxury when writing is how you make your living. And that is probably because, I was brought up as a creator by Siegel, who basically only had two forms of encouragement. You can quit any time, at which point I would just become infuriated and not quit. Or write every day, because if you don't treat it like a job, it'll never be one. So that's what I was told from the time I was 12, which is when he and I met. And it was probably too harsh for a 12-year-old, but here I am. So look, and I'm not going to say it's not challenging sometimes. Staring at a blank page is horrifying often. But when you do sort of, I know this sounds crazy, but when you do sort of remove the romanticism of creative endeavor in a nuts and bolts way, like I'm not going to say that you're not building a table, but if you format your work in such a way where all of that sort of heady romantic work goes into the planning and the outlining and things like that, it is easier to put the implementation on more of a workman-like schedule. So you deal with writer's block less, which is not to say you don't deal with it, but it's mostly out of the way by the time you're actually writing the script, because you've already planned the story in the outline or pre-writing format, and that's where you sort of get hung up. So that's sort of my answer, because once the implementation is sort of more workman-like, it's kind of hard to get tripped up in that, because to me, the breakthrough is always when you get something done, and it's easier to get something done and accomplish something when you already have done all the pre-work and you're really just implementing it on the page. So that's what I do, is I let myself feel those things, but it's always in the pre-work. It's always in the outlining, the story planning. And then, I run my week very much like you would an office job, even though my office is in my apartment. So, Monday and Tuesday, I do plotting and issue. Thursday and Friday, I do dialogue and issue. And Wednesday and Thursday, dialogue and issue. And then Friday, I revise it and send it in. And that's every week. So having an actual schedule like that kind of makes it hard to get caught up in the unhelpful forms of romanticism when it comes to creative endeavor. Some are very helpful, but in other scenarios, you get to be like my old boss when I was in wine retail, who, would always say like, "Oh, Steve, how do you work 14 hours a day here and go home and write? I have to rent a cabin in the woods and go there for a couple of days and sit in the nude and light candles. And maybe after 4 days, I could probably maybe start writing. How do you do it every night after working here?" And I would just say, "Well, I go home, I have dinner, and then I write for 3 hours. That's how it happens." And I'll always remember that upon telling him that, he said, "Well, Steve, that's the difference between you and me, because you're a professional and I'm an artist." And now 6 years later, one of us has been published and the other is running a wine store. So I think the answer is you absolutely have to feel that intense creative passion and romanticism when it comes to any type of creative work. But you also have to know how to compartmentalize that from the implementation of it, so that you can't get tripped up in those things and when it comes time to deliver on time. And outside of that, the very yeoman-like answer is that if I'm stuck on writing or something else, like I get up and I do something else that allows me to feel like I've accomplished something. And it's been really easy in the pandemic because I never leave my house like everyone else. So yeah, if you really are stuck, I will go and do very pathetic mid-30s domestic things. I'll go and do the laundry. I'll do the dishes or something. And that sounds ridiculous, but maybe not, because the thing is, once that thing is done, you're like, oh, I've checked something off my list. I'm not an unproductive, stonewalled, whatever fool. I got this done. And I always find that it's easier after that to get the thing that you couldn't get done once you finally knock something off your list for the day.
I think there's an interesting dynamic taking the romanticism out of the actual craft of it and making it more, it is a job. And if you do the thing, you get better at the thing. So I think it is I would have never expected that answer from pretty much anyone.
I'm careful to say, I'm not saying that creative work is unromantic and doesn't need passion. It absolutely needs all those things, but it's about knowing where it needs it and when it's a job, I guess is what I would say. Getting
it done. I fully understand everyone puts their heart into the art that they're creating, but having more of a regimen is very, very interesting to me, just because I've never really thought about that way.
Well, and it can catch up to you too, trust me, because when the pandemic hit, I was like, need to make rent. And I pitched 7 books, and most of them got accepted, actually. So you're going to see a lot from me in this year, probably mostly next year. But then July came and I was like, fuck, I have to write all these books.
I'm just too damn good.
Well, that remains to be seen. You haven't read any of them yet. But I was like, what's time? I don't know what time is. Like July, 9 deadlines. Cool. It was like turning into Howard Hughes. So, I can catch up to you. But that's the thing. Like entertainment and creative work, it is. I feel like we talk a lot about the exciting Grant Morrison and Alan Moore doing their wizard gimmick side of things, and that's amazing. Like that's incredible, and we all do things like that in our own way, whatever it is. But there's also it's also about hustle. It's also about getting it done. It's also about being reliable and being dependable to yourself and the people you're working with. So I think that we always need to talk more about that, because when you're a writer, especially, like we don't talk about it nearly as much as we should. But, if you allow yourself to get wrapped up in your own head about, say, about being blocked or something like that, like in comics, man, that doesn't just affect you. Like that affects the 4 to 6 other people that are on the relay race that is any other book, getting their work done and feeding their family and doing things like that. So when I say that it's a luxury, it's not me being a hard ass. Like when you're a collaborator, you got to push through those things, because tons of other people are relying on you, especially when you're a writer, because you're the first person holding the baton.
Wow. We do these interviews so often, and I don't have a good filler. Like I don't have something to respond with, because I am so taken aback by the insight that we're given here. Just getting to hear someone explain their process and their thoughts is such an interesting thing to me. So I do want to talk a little bit more about how you write, but before we get into like a not a tough question, but a different type of question, do you ever listen to music while you write, or like what do you listen to?
So I'm relatively strange as creators go with stuff like this. So my first work that I wrote when I was like coming up as an adult, at least, I mean, when I was 12, I was, had to be in bed by 9, but, most of it was done in the back room of it, or not the back room, but the back of a Denny's in Syracuse, which is where I used to live. So I became very accustomed.
In the Denny's you lived?
Pardon me?
You lived in the Denny's?
Yeah, well, essentially, yes, because I was in strife with my family. But also in Syracuse is what I meant. But I became very accustomed to like a lot of background noise. So a lot of people need like complete silence, for example. I find if there's complete silence while I'm working, I tend to like sort of go, you want to talk about what blocks me? It's getting trapped in my own head in silence. So I have started listening to music more recently, but the real answer is I usually will put on like movies I've seen before. Or, I got the WWE Network because there's thousands and thousands of hours of useless content, just people running their mouths that you don't really have to pay attention to. So I will usually do things like that are sort of like white noise, which actually helps me focus. But that's extremely unusual. I don't think I've met anyone else in comics that likes that. Usually the answer is like movie soundtracks or things like that. But I don't. Mm-hmm. I don't have an answer that's that sexy. Like I need to distract myself a little bit so I can focus, because I learned to write as an adult in the back of a shitty franchise diner. So that's my story.
I mean, a bunch of sweaty people wrestling is kind of a sexy answer.
Well, that depends on the era, but yes.
To get completely off the rails, who's your, I don't want to say favorite because it's hard to pick favorites, but who's your favorite wrestler or your favorite match, if that helps?
Well, favorite wrestlers, like I don't have one, because it's like, what are you talking about? I guess if I had to pick one right now, it'd be Keith Lee, because I think he's kind of good at everything. But at the same time, like, what does that even mean in 2020? Like, you look at a guy like Danhausen, who's like crushed the internet in a time when people can barely wrestle in a ring. So I think people like that are incredible. People on the mic, there's a time when he was not, anytime he's not injured, it's Samoa Joe. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that he is good at everything. He's probably the best promo. And actually, in light of that, I think my real answer, because I brought around to it, is actually right now, it's probably Big E, now that they're giving him a solo push, because I genuinely think that he is good. I mean, he's great in the ring. he can get anything over. I mean, who has had a more torrid affair of weird ass gimmicks than the stuff they've thrown at New Day? And he has the physicality, like he's believable. And so I love him. Favorite match? I don't know. I do kind of really like the Best versus the Beast, but I can't actually remember what SummerSlam that's from. But I think it's a great match with Brock and Punk. And like, I don't know, there's emotional favorites. I did really like it. It's kind of marky to mention a lot, like more current things, but I did really like the Dustin versus Cody match from Double or Nothing. I think, or it might've been All Out. Cause it was just so raw and real. So, I mean, like it changes by the day, you know, and that's kind of like a goofy ass answer. But it's hard to say who's my favorite because people really, like, you can tell, like, they something catches and they go from being boring to really easy to invest in almost overnight. Like
I've talked about it before, but it's interesting how the comics world and the wrestling world are kind of side by side. Like most people who are a fan of one are a fan of the other because they are these characters that sometimes they're just on fire. They're cutting the best promos. You're like, this Batman book is the best, but other times it's not your thing. So like you transition to another like favorite and you follow a new series, but, I'll reel us back into actual comic books. How has it been working for you, working for the big two and then doing your own creator-owned stuff? Do you approach these differently when you're writing or the way you construct these stories?
Yeah, but absolutely, but it's not like a better or worse thing. They're just different. You know, at the end of the day, and I think this is something that some other pros struggle with, which is not like me casting shade. It's something I struggled with when I started, because especially when you come up as a fan as well, like we love these characters, but at the end of the day, you know, I don't own Batman, for example. You know, or I don't own Wonder Woman. And so as much as I love her, we're not the final say on those characters. So you are taking part in a essentially an 80-year long story when you're working at the big two. And yeah, there's been reboots and things like that, but you know, if you're me or Grant Morrison, it all happened. But you know, but the demands are different, you know, of essentially providing a story that is going to be one of an ongoing mosaic of stories with characters that appear in multiple formats, whose will is decided upon and managed by, you know, tens of people from many different walks of life. It's a different thing than creating something from whole cloth, like you would do at Image or Boom or Aftershock or Vault or places like that, or 215 Inc. I know you guys are near Philadelphia, some of you. So the rules are different. You are privileged to be able to be part of this 80+ year long ongoing story, you know, like, and that's an incredible privilege and responsibility representing these characters to you folks who read the books and to the legacy of the characters. But you're starting your own legacy and building your own, you know, your own worlds from the first kernel up when you're doing originals. So, yeah, I don't think one is better or worse, but they are different. You know, you don't have to, when you're doing something original, you're the beginning, you know, the buck stops with you. You don't have to consider you don't have to consider the implications in cross media of a character because it's not $1 billion IP. And you also don't have to worry about, you know, what happened in 1956 in issue, 371 of a book. And so it's different, but I love them both because now that after leaving DC for the most part after 6 years, it's freeing to not have to be able to be like, what was the last sort of canon appearance of X character so that we don't mess that up. But also as a fan and as a huge guy at DC lore, I love doing that archaeology. So it's just different. You're flexing different muscles. And when I go back, or when I go to Marvel, I'll be excited to be putting those hats on again and getting those gloves out and digging deep into the lore, because I love that too.
I am so glad you mentioned muscles, because you post about your workouts a bit. Does your routine go hand in hand with your writing routine? Does working out help you get ideas?
It helps me clear my head, like it's kind of, if I'm on task, it's the end of my day. If I'm not on task, like today, it's an intermission before I come back and hustle through stuff. But it just, it's, I don't necessarily, at least when I'm at my house in the time of COVID, like think a lot about story and stuff like that. But that's because my time when I used to think about story was when I was on the treadmill, and now I'm at my house doing jumping jacks like an asshole because I can't run outside with a mask on. I mean, I personally can't. Many do. So now it's sort of like my head clearing. Like I wake up, I infuse myself with caffeine, and then I work all day, and then that's how I sort of put a dot on it. Like I burn all that off. And, whatever on fire thing I've been emailed about or stressed from comics, because nothing ever stressful happens in comics.
Nope. Never. Nothing. All, sunshine and rainbows and smiley faces.
Yes. And Twitter is a very safe place.
Yeah, it's great. No one's ever mean.
So, like whatever's happened there, like I try to just blow it all out. And that's been very useful for me. It's definitely been useful for my stress level. That and whatever you see me post about on social media, even though I'm like the least masked of any of those other comics guys, it's like Gabe Eltaeb and John Livesey, both dudes who like could either pick me up like the Hulk and break me in half, like in fucking like Ultimate Hulk versus Wolverine in the case of Gabe, or in the case of John Livesey, he's like in his mid-40s but could like turn a piece of coal into a diamond with his abs, and so I loathe them both for different reasons, but love them both for others. But yeah, in addition to that, I will just go downstairs where I have my like basement punching bag set up and work the day's comics bullshit out that way. But it's mostly just a way to clear my head, because if, especially when the office in DC moved to California, like in a real world sense, it became very hard to sort of know when you could turn off, because, 6 p.m. there is 9 p.m. for me in the East Coast. And it was kind of like, okay, when can I actually relax? When does my workday end? Mm-hmm. So it's something that I sort of built into my life to, maintain a sense of normalcy. Because when you're a freelancer, like it's very easy to be like, well, this is just what I do all the time. I'm like in a fugue state where I write about Lycra, and it can't be that way forever.
So I have to follow up on this, because I've worked in the fitness industry for like 4 years. You work out at night? You don't do mornings?
I don't work out. I wouldn't say work out at night. I'm usually like in between 3 and 5 is when things happen. My boyfriend loves mornings. I hate mornings. Like, I'll just be completely honest with you. Like, he can get up and go to the gym, or he'll get up and run. He's back before like 10:30. But I'm like both an early morning person, but I need to drink at least like a pot of coffee before I start to like become human. So actually exercising in the morning, I will admit to you, is abysmal to me. It could be that I did swimming in high school, and I used to have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to do a practice before school. And so now like all I want to do in the morning is like, I get up at like 7:30 or 8, which for a freelancer is like 5 a.m.
Yeah.
But I have to drink 1,000 coffee, and actually, in the way I work, I usually have to watch something that I find creatively fulfilling. So I do like a half hour of like television or movie in the morning, and then I'm like, oh, that was so good. I want to do something good. And then I get into work.
Okay. Now I know that about you.
Just a little jump start in the morning.
So I wanted to get into a little bit about Manhunter. And reading Manhunter now is a lot, because it deals with police, a sort of plague, and a lot about identity. When you started that book, was there anything you were looking to really drive home with the story using Martian Manhunter?
Yeah, the main thing is I wanted to examine a lot of the core phrases that had become sort of accepted about Jean, but did we ever really, really examine why? Like I started to think about them, and it comes from my love for the character. You know, I have runs of Martian Manhunter I adore, almost all of them in their own way. But I also sort of wondered where is his, well, in the modern era, where's his Mr. Miracle? You know, where's his vision? And the hubris of me to say that I could be like Tom King. Well, that's ridiculous.
Where's this Tom King?
I have hair.
That's fired.
And I can write a 6-panel page, but but I love you, Tom. But no, but the real answer is like, this is a character. He's my favorite DC Comics character, and I wanted to show people why I love him. And also at the same time, like sometimes that means just not giving a character a hand job. And yeah, like I know people were alarmed when the book was announced, and of course, the marketing department was like, he's so corrupt. This is like when David came out and was like, hey, everybody, Midnighter is going to be on Grindr. And I'm like, yeah, it's one panel. But of course, before the book came out, everybody was like, Steve's turning him into a trash bag whore, a thing that was actually said to me on Twitter. And I was just like, why don't you read it? It's one panel, folks. And anyway, so but it wasn't obviously just him being woefully corrupt. There was a reason. And when I say that you don't want to just give a character a hand job, that's me being a vulgar upstate New Yorker. But it is a tenet of something I truly learned when I came to DC, which is that if you love a character so much, which I do with a lot of them, and others, we all fall victim to this as creators. Sometimes you forget that loving them is not enough. You have to show people why. And so I wanted to do a book, and you can't assume that everybody feels the way you do. And that's a big mistake that I made early on. And I think a lot of other people do. Like, oh, if I just make this character cool, like I already know they're cool. Well, people will follow. No, people have to know why. People have to go on the journey you went on, when you realize that those characters were cool. So I wanted to do that for him. And to me, that meant enriching his character, not changing him, but molding what we knew, fitting some more story in between that gave him a little bit more of a journey, because we really empathize with the journey when it comes to these characters. One of the reasons I think you've seen a lot of changes in DCIP over the past 30 years is that the characters are older. On average, they're 30 years older than Marvel characters. And when you see these quote unquote reinventions of especially Silver Age characters in DC and Golden Age characters, oftentimes it is to make them more I don't want to say more like Marvel characters, because I'm really saying it's to make them more human. It's to make them characters who are who they are for a reason rather than just because. Look at what Jeff did with Barry Allen and Hal Jordan. Characters who previously were good people just because. But now, when he went back and did his Rebirth series and the Secret Origin series, you found out about Barry's mom, you found out about Hal's dad, and he gave them a really human pain that they eventually overcome, or they're constantly trying to overcome. And that makes us empathize with them in a way that I think that it was harder to before. And that is ultimately what Marvel did with Spider-Man. It's what DC did with Batman. You need that moment, I thought, you need to lay a character low to really cheer when they overcome. And for Spider-Man, that was letting the burglar go. And when I came to John, I was like, okay, I want to give him this moment of a real abject failure so that we know really how much he's overcome. Why was that important to me? Because we always like to say, John is the most human person on the Justice League. He's the heart and soul of the Justice League. And I really thought about that. And I said, well, if you have this team of essentially characters who are gods, Superman, Wonder Woman, all the big seven are essentially gods, with the exception of Batman. But I would say that his intellect and wealth.
Bat God.
No comment. But but the point is, like, what would a character have to go through for all of these people to know that no matter what they were going through, this was the shoulder that they could lean on. John would understand. And I realized that he really had to have a journey we'd never seen before. So for me, it was telling that story, investigating that story, and showing how he could really find a way to have pride in himself, being who he is, and give him sort of a climb back to greatness. That would mean that in the present, when all of those characters, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, The Flash, Green Lantern, they all know that this is a guy that's been through the shit, and he knows, and he found a way to stay positive through it all and take pride in himself. So he's going to know how to help them. So for me, it was all about paying forward and emboldening what we already knew about Jean, but we just had to find a way to get there, and that's how the series came about.
So back to the last bit of that last question about identity. What does the idea of the Martian social form mean? Is it because the idea of identity seems to be a theme in some of your work? Is this an exploration of that? And do you think it really it reflects our real world social performances?
I think it's an extrapolation. One of the things that Riley and I set out to do with our reinvention of Mars is to not do things to the best of our ability, which of course is limited because we are human, is to not think like a human. To think like a person who, the two core tenets of Marxist society that make them not like us. There are many, but the core are the shape-shifting and the telepathy. So how could we rework society around those two pivot points? And in the case of the social form, the social shape, it was all about how, you said performance. And to me, that's the key. When as humans, we try to change and manipulate as much about ourselves as we can to make a statement about who we are every time we leave the house. So what would that mean for, we thought about if quite literally everything about our bodies could be changed. And that's how we sort of came up with Chrysalis Night and the social shape, to take something that is often passive and a work in progress and make it active, and say that now, because of shape-shifting, the way that Martians present themselves to other Martians in public from top to bottom is something they design from the ground up. It's a statement about how they want to be seen, who they are inside, essentially worn on the outside. And I'm pretty sure Mariah says something to that effect in the book. To me, it's an extrapolation, because we, to the best of our ability, I think, like to hold control over our appearance and our persona when we're seen by others. So knowing what we do as humans with our limited ability to change that, Riley and I took a look at what Martians would do with the ultimate ability to alter how they look. And that's sort of how the social shape came about. And it was a spot for us to both sort of comment on human society, and dig into the lore a little bit more, and make it seem like there was hypothetically, that we had a plan for these people. And we did. It allows us then, when John is on Earth, to really show, because we built what the social shape means, to show his journey visually, because he doesn't actually wear the classic Martian Manhunter costume until he's figured out what being the Martian Manhunter means. So we sort of rebuilt Martian society, essentially to embolden that moment when he finally shows up in the classic Silver Age costume.
Wow. So you wrote the Justice League of America for Rebirth, and it really was such an interesting group of heroes and former villains that formed together in this team. What do you keep in mind when you're writing a team? What do you think makes team books interesting, and what dynamics do you try to bring to teams to keep them interesting for the long run?
Well, they shouldn't get along, and it shouldn't be easy. And I think I did that to varying success in Justice League. I think there's some things I could have pushed up a little more, but with that league, outside of a couple of things we had to do, the idea was, we pulled together characters that we thought would not automatically get along. They have to want this. I mean, they have to have a reason to be there, but it doesn't mean that they all like each other. It doesn't mean that they're all sort of they're all on the same page about how to get what they want. And so with the Justice League, it was, these are all characters who want to give people hope by showing that like superheroes don't have to just fly among them, live above them, cast judgment from on high. That Justice League to me was essentially about the way we go into communities and try to give aid. And it was played out as a superhero book, but it's a lot about what I sort of experienced when I have done disaster relief for like after Hurricane Michael, but even before that, when I lived out of the country. I lived in Russia a couple of years ago. And it was about, through a superhero narrative, saying, it's not enough to just go in and offer help the way you think you should. A key is listening. And I find in my current work, when you see some other books that are coming out, like heroes and people with power have to listen. To me, that's so important. And that sort of started with Justice League. So when it came to building up the team, you need to put characters on it that are going to be 100% on board with that. And you're going to have to put characters on it that have wildly different ideas about how they're going to reach that goal and are, going to all but come to blows about it. Because that's how you get tension. And then eventually when they overcome that, hypothetically, everybody cheers because they found understanding. So to me, a team just has to be about those character dynamics. It has to be about people who are going to push and pull each other to the limit, in a way that entertains all you folks.
Yeah, I think the idea of the theme of understanding and listening is such a very refreshing thing in the world of superheroes, just because you do get a lot of that punching and things like that. So seeing those themes in mainline DC and Marvel is an interesting feat. That being said, Marvel, it was pretty big hullabaloo that the Steve Orlando was going to write a book at Marvel. And I know there's not many details out about what you are writing, but there is one character that I saw, Dr. Doom, and you sort of had an interesting relationship with writing villains at DC. And I just want to know some of your feelings on the Good Doctor.
Oh, well, I wrote Target brand Dr. Doom and Lord Haddock, so it's only appropriate that I would get to write the name brand when I cross. I think Dr. Doom is fascinating. I think he's one of the best characters in comics. You have to be intimidating to be the guy that inspired Darth Vader. One of the inspirations for Darth Vader.
Huh. I never knew that.
But I love Doom. I love that he is. I love his complex morality. I love his ego, and by that token, I love his flaw. His flaws. I should say. I love that he's almost like Lex Luthor, like those moments where Superman says that Lex could have saved the world, ages ago, countless times if he would have just gotten out of his own way. And to me, Doom is a little bit like that, but he's a percentage less. Not despotically, but he's a percentage less evil than Lex, which I know is crazy to say because they're both quite evil. But like Doom won't let the world be destroyed because, in his opinion, it's his anyway. So he's almost protective of it. And I find things like that fascinating. And he can do things that other characters can't. In Darkhold, which we're hoping is going to be able to pick up work again. We have this original version of the Darkhold that's never been seen before. It's only been hinted at in previous appearances when you saw that the one that appeared in other Marvel books was noted to be a copy of a copy. It was a copy on parchment, of a copy on stone of the original version that was written on skin. And now we have the original version, and anyone who reads it goes mad. So when it's uncovered in issue 1, there's this big fear of, how can we see what's inside it? Who could read it? Doom has taken it, but the other characters, Scarlet Witch is another major player, shows up and says, oh, well, we can't, anyone who reads that would instantly lose their mind. I can't read it. Nobody could read it. And Doom, of course, is like, oh, I read that shit an hour ago.
Read it on the toilet. No big deal.
Like nobody can read it. Nobody but Doom. And those to me are the quintessential moments. His will is so strong. In many ways, that's almost a superpower to me. And at the same time, he's so flawed. I mean, he look at Secret Wars when it was all about getting, it was everything he did was just to prove that he's better than Mr. Fantastic. Like, he is such a genius, but can't stand being the second smartest person on the planet. And to me, it's so human and so petty and so tragic that I just find him endlessly fascinating.
I feel like he's also one of the only characters who can pull off all white, like the whole white cloak. He looks awesome in that.
It's Dr. Doom. It's Dr. Doom and Zor-El. Those are the two.
Yes. He's just a beautiful man, and the best Iron Man too. And I'll stand by that.
That's such a good design with the cape.
But we do want to talk. We don't want to give any spoilers, but we do want to talk about your new book, Commanders in Crisis.
I would be excited to talk about that. We did a lot of news over the weekend. We started showing our variant covers. We're doing I'm basically just living out all of my comics creator fantasies now that I'm independent. So, we're doing character-based variant covers. For people who asked about my workout routine on this podcast, if the book launches to over 60K, I will publish a thirst trap selfie cover. I will dunk on myself endlessly to celebrate 60K sales in a second. So we're doing some wild stuff, but Commanders in Crisis is my first truly independent launch since 2015, essentially since before my career began in earnest at DC. I've done creator participation books, which I really enjoyed at Boom and Skybound and Aftershock, and there's a ton more coming at Aftershock. But for things that I truly own myself, Commanders in Crisis is the first one in a long time. And I'm pulling out all the stops on it. We also just announced that friend of the room, Dan DiDio, is writing the intro to the first issue. One of his first things he's done since he left DC, and I'm very excited about that. He's good. I mean, all of my loving jokes and voices aside, I got a lot of support from him when I was at the company, so I'm happy that we can work together again. And it's for people who like my Justice League, people who like Milk Wars. This is, to me, is like an ode to the comics that made me love comics. When we're talking about the mid to late 90s, it doesn't really matter the timeline. That is when I started to love comics, especially. But to me, that just means huge ideas coupled with sort of the chaser of just classic explosive comic book art. Things like when I was reading Stormwatch with Tom Rainey, obviously The Authority, obviously Grant and Howard Porter's Justice League. These were huge idea comics, and they were delivered to you in the tastiest sort of comic art package possible. And that's what we want to do. So Commanders in Crisis, this is about the last survivors of the multiverse. The multiverse is dying because all these other worlds were so toxic and broken that it started to treat them like tumors. It started to treat them like infections. And they've come to our world, Earth Z, the final Earth, because this is the last one left. We don't know it day to day, but we're the last shot for sentient life in all of reality. And the team is trying to keep us good enough long enough to where we don't get destroyed by the multiverse we live in, like an infection. But they can't even tell us about the multiverse because obviously things are tense enough as it is. Imagine if we found out that we were really the last shot, we had the last one left. It'd be even worse. So it's a book built on heroism and secrets. It's a book about hope, which is really hard because at the end of the first issue, you realize it's a superhero murder mystery and the victim is empathy itself. And so if that's dead, how the hell are we going to stay good enough long enough to not be destroyed?
So the reader is introduced to an already established world. What did you want to explore in it that way rather than from an origin stories?
Well, I wouldn't say so we start in media res because I think that, you will find out where these characters come from without a question in the series. But at the same time, I like to hit the ground running because a lot of the books that I'm emulating do similar things, this is my ode to things like Doom Patrol. This is my ode to things like Umbrella Academy, Black Hammer. And those are all books where, you meet the characters in issue one, but there's so much to explore and so many inwoven mysteries in the past seeding future stories. So that's sort of what we want to emulate with Commanders in Crisis. You know, we're going to welcome you into this world. We're going to slowly expand it for you. And yeah, you'll see that not everything is as it seems, even by the end of issue 1. And it's only going to keep going from there. Like, I want to give people the feeling that I felt when I joined sort of the current comics fandom with Grant Morrison's Justice League. I was a comic reader before, but I wasn't reading like the weeklies. I was just getting things, from flea markets, and there was really no like rhyme or reason to what I was buying. But when I got in that book, it was just like issue 13. It was like the middle of Rock of Ages, and it was told in a welcoming way, but at the same time, there was so much more for me to discover. Reading backwards, looking into the future, reading past series, and so that's our hope. The only difference, of course, is that as I said, there isn't 80 years of story to unpack. So just as you get a taste for these stories and these new and more of this world, well, we're going to give it to you with spin-offs and things like that. But I want it to feel like you're stepping into a world that is there to explore. That's what made me love comics, and hopefully this will make people love the world of Commanders in Crisis.
Yeah, wow. So that is probably where I would bring my love back to, is the Grant Morrison Justice League. So I really see what you're saying there. I didn't want to give anything away with these questions because I want people to read the book, but I love the characters, and they're especially the designs are so interesting because a lot of them do look like typical superheroes, but from different genres. I think it really does meld those worlds beautifully. So I'm very excited for everyone to be able to read this.
I hope they do. I mean, this is the type of, where every issue I come up with something that challenges David A. Tinto, who's drawing it, and just makes me want to live in this world a little while longer. I've just started hinting at the trinity that exists in the world of Commanders in Crisis. I just got designs on them. And I'm very excited about that. But the main thing is, like, for people who wanted to see more of the me that was in things like Martian Manhunter, who was in things like, especially the strange alien sides of Batman Shadow, again, Milk Wars, a book that I co-wrote with Gerard. So much that I wanted to do, but I either couldn't find the place or I couldn't, necessarily find the right inroad. It's going to happen in Commanders in Crisis, and it's just going to be new, raw creativity every issue. Again, with that tasty superhero sandwich provided by David A. Tinto. So it's going to taste great, and then when it hits the back of your palate, you're going to think about what you just did, and that's kind of what we're here for.
I never expected a comic book to be described that way, but... So Jake, you want to take it off with the big finale?
All right. So, like our first question, which is about sandwiches, hard-hitting journalism. If you had to make a Rube Goldberg machine, what would be its purpose?
It's really cute. Before I answer this, that you guys had to give me an example of a Rube Goldberg device if you hadn't read any plot I ever wrote ever.
Some people don't know what it is.
We discovered that some time ago.
It's tough. I'm actually really bad at numerous things. That's why it's good that I'm not single, because I can't do things like open packages or so it'd probably do something extremely mundane, like disconnect the back of the vacuum, which I also can't do. What else? Turn on the Xbox. These are all I'm not joking about any of these things.
These are all real.
I bought the Arrow Season 8 Blu-ray, and I'm held hostage to my boyfriend because I don't know how to use the Xbox that we watch it on. So maybe that's the answer. Although right now, it could be any number of things. But so yeah, it might turn on the Xbox. It might, it might flip my omelet. Yet another thing I can't do. It might polish my. It might polish my Marvel rejection letter from 2003 that I keep in my office.
That's so petty. I love it. Now you're there.
Let's get the books to come out first.
I'll write some letters. It's fine.
Just put it right on the cover.
I really want to be that guy. Like, I want like a really, maybe you guys can be the one, like, to give me like a really scathing review in a book so I can just run that motherfucker right in the cover.
Oh, if you want it, I'm an editor at CBR now. I'll write whatever you want.
So Steve Orlando, what a crocodile's afterbirth of a writer. No, so what it would do is it would come around my house and it would take the small Jeff Goldblum from Independence Day action figure I also keep in my office, and when I was sad, it would drop him right into my lap. That's what it would do.
I learned a lot about you, Steve.
And it would then trigger a YouTube video of him just saying, "Must go faster, must go faster."
Life finds a way.
Forget the fat lady. You're obsessed with the fat lady. I could do this all day.
So when does Commanders in Crisis come out?
All right. So Commanders in Crisis comes out October 14th. My now defunct anniversary with my ex. So let's celebrate my victory by making.
There you go.
And pre-orders are open till September 21st. So any way that folks support the book's incredible. That said, and especially in the current market, if you happen to tell your retailer that you would like it beforehand, it's a huge, huge help to us creators who are just trying to get in the mix and hustle and keep these books going. So that can happen until the 21st. If you follow me on social media, I'm posting the order forms all the time. You just have to print it out and bring it to your local comic shop or your online comic shop if you use like a DCBS type service. But at the end of the day, any support counts. I just am so excited for everyone to see this book. Like, I mean, I'm writing issue 3 right now as we talk. We're going to be all the things that I care about in comics: thought-provoking, on time, and
on time.
Thought-provoking and on time. Listen, I mean, we had a fill-in artist on issue 2 of Midnighter because to the best of my ability, in my opinion, it is so important that my word means something to you folks. And part of that is always being on time. So yeah, we're going to be there. We're going to shock you and wow you every month and show you stuff you've never seen before, starting October 14th.
Where can people find you online?
Well, I have two. My public social is Twitter and Instagram. If you couldn't tell from listening to this podcast, it's sort of like a Venn diagram. If you want slightly more comics and slightly less me with my shirt off, Twitter. If you want the inverse of that, then Instagram. Both are at the Steve Orlando because there's a really patient mobile app game designer who gets a lot of my emails. So that's why I'm the Steve Orlando.
Brother Steve.
There's a couple actually. There's one that was an art teacher from my hometown too. That poor guy is getting a lot of opinions on Twitter as well. But either way, find me there. I am most always talking about comics, sometimes cutting a promo on something that I don't even know, what it's going to be until the mood catches me, but I've got opinions and I will be there on Twitter and on Instagram. And I especially love, I love hearing from people. And the only thing I don't like is a boring troll. So if you've got wild opinions, bring them to me too. I'll always remember some guy tried to troll me because I retweeted apparently a fake thing about Jersey Mike's not supporting some
Yes.
And this dude presumably, so apologies if you're listening, just posted yeah, but that Mikey Way sauce when it hits your lips, brother. And I was just no. And I'm sure that was supposed to annoy me, but it was just made my fucking night. So if you're gonna come for me, make it interesting, and I'll be excited. I'm from Central New York, I can't be shocked. So I'm excited to meet people wherever you would be on social media.
Well, Steve, thank you for joining us. You can catch us in 2 weeks, same bat time, same bat channel. I'm gonna pause the recording here. Holy shit.